Today's tutorial is great because today we're going to create one of my favorite things you can create in 3D, and that's neon signs. I will show you a quick and easy technique how to convert nearly anything into a neon sign in Blender. May it be a logo, may it be text, you name it. And it's pretty easy because let's jump right into what we're going to create today. You can see we have our base mesh right here. We have these light tubes in the inside and a glass tube on the outside. Then we have these cables, and yeah, we're going to create everything you see here, and even more. We are going to animate our neon sign. I will quickly show this in the preview. This is what we're going to be creating, and we add a simple camera move to it. And now we have a very easy neon logo animation, for example. So now let's jump right in and create a neon sign. Let's start with the default scene in Blender and select everything and press X to delete everything. We'll first do this neon sign with a simple text object, and later on I will show you how you can do this with your logo, for example. Let's go to front orthographic view, press Shift A and add a new text object. RX 90 degrees to rotate it around the x-axis, and press Tab to go into text edit mode. And now let's simply add a X, and to change the text settings, I like to go into the text editor and go to font. Now let me look for a font. I think I will be using the font Wispy, and we use extra bold to make it really fat, and then go to paragraph and set the alignment to center. This will center our text, and the vertical alignment again to center. This will make sure our text is perfectly in the center. So now let's save our project. Okay, now let's select our text, go to Object and convert it to a mesh. This will convert this text object to a mesh, and if we go into edit mode, you see it created these polygons for us. And now let's hold Alt and select these outer edge loops. It's a bit difficult to see at the moment, but this selects only the outer edge loops. And now press Ctrl I to invert your selection and only select the inner ones, and press delete and delete edges. This will remove all edges, vertices and faces in the center and leave us just with this outline. So now we need to create these separate neon tubes, and this is just as easy as selecting our desired geometry and creating a tube from that. So let's select these edges, for example, and let's press P to separate them into their own object. And let's do this with the rest of these as well. So let's press P to separate this one, do it with this one as well, and I think this should be its own object. And that is what you need to decide. Where do I want to place these tubes? Okay, the next thing we're gonna do is select all of these and go into edit mode. This will turn everything into edit mode, even though there are separate objects. Now let's make these very sharp corners a bit more rounded. So select every vertex and press Ctrl Shift B to bevel them. And if you scroll up your mouse wheel, you can now make the transition a bit smoother. I think something like this should look great. And since we've separated these objects, these edges right here, these vertices right here, don't get transformed. And this is very important in a second, because let's again go into edit mode, and now let's select all the edges where our tubes meet, like this one, and press double G to move them back. Why we do this, you will see in a second. And now let's do the same right here. Of course, we could have selected all four, but I will make it roughly like this. And now let's do the same with these ones. Move them a bit back. This one as well. Double G to slide them along their edges. Okay, this looks great. Now let's select everything again, go back into edit mode and select these outer vertices, which we've separated. And now to make a three-dimensional shape, let's take them and press E and extrude them along the y-axis. And now you can see where this will lead. Now we really see how this comes together. Let's again select these vertices. And make them a bit rounder, so press Ctrl-Shift-B to bevel them and roughly match the bevel size from before. But I think it is not the exact same size, so we could done every bevel in one go, but I think this works as well. Okay, now to the final part. Since these are just outlines, we now need to go to Object and convert them to curves again. And this has converted everything to curves. And now let's go into our curve settings and go to the bevel. And now let us change the bevel depth like this. And now we have these neon tubes. Make them a bit thicker like this, I think. Give them a bit more resolution. Right click and shade them smooth. Maybe give them a bit more resolution right here. Okay, and now let's do the same thing for these as well. Let's copy these values. Okay, let's paste them in. And let's shade everything smooth. Okay, I think at the moment they're a bit too large, so let's decrease the size a bit to something a bit more reasonable. Let me have a look. Yeah, I think this looks a bit better. Okay, so now they don't get pinched right here. Okay, and that's the base shape done. Now this is a glass tube which goes over these center light tubes, and to do this, to do these inner tubes, let's simply select our outer tube, press Shift D to duplicate it, and now let's change the depth, of course, for the right one, and make it a bit smaller. So now it's in the inside, and we do exactly the same thing with the other ones as well. Let's copy this value, press Shift D and paste it, Shift D and paste, and Shift D and paste. So now these are the light emitting tubes, and these glass tubes are just for protection. Now let's add a wall, mesh plane RX and rotate it around the x-axis. Go into the side view and move it a bit back. Now at the moment these tubes are right in the middle of the air, and now I'll show you how to connect them to the wall. There are two types of connections. The first ones are these starting connections where the cable goes, and to add one to this, let's select one of these vertices and cursor to selected, add a new mesh, and I think we'll choose a circle for this. Add the circle and give it 8 vertices. At the moment this is very large, so let's move it a bit to the side and go into local view. Let's extrude it to the bottom like this. And now let's extrude this to the top, make it a bit smaller, and merge it at the center. And I think make this a bit longer, since this is the place where our cable will come out. And move this inwards, scale it, and merge it at the center. Let's give it a bit of thickness right here and shade everything smooth. Let's give it a subdivision surface modifier. And let's select these edges right here with Alt and left click and press Ctrl B to bevel them to make this transition a bit more clear. Do the same thing right here as well. Scale this a bit down. Yeah, and I think this is roughly the shape. Now let's leave local editing, scale this down, and move it to our pipes and connect these pipe openings with that. Let's look at it from the side. And I think this should work. Okay, it shouldn't intersect with our plane right here. And make it a bit smaller. Okay, and now from this out, we're going to add our cable. To do this, let's select these vertices right here, Shift S, cursor to select it, and add a new Bezier curve. Go into wireframe to have a look at this. Now select the starting vertex and move it around this place. Select this one, rotate it, and scale it a bit down until you get this shape of the cable. Let's rotate this as well. And to really have a look how this will look in the end, let's select our curve and do the same we did for our neon tubes and give it a little bit bevel. Let's have a look. Okay, let's rotate this a bit to the front. And now we have our cable. I think it should be a bit larger, a bit more thickness. Kind of like this. And very important is to move it inside and rotate it so it follows the shape, the angle. Let's make it like this. Give it a natural flow. And very important, make it a bit angled up the side as well to give it a more bit of 3D effect, like this. And I think this should do it. I might rotate this a bit. So let me grab this handle. Move it a bit in to make this transition a bit sharper. Give it a bit more resolution. Yeah, and I think this looks great. Now select our cable and this piece right here and add this to all of these starting points of our tubes. So Shift D to duplicate it, rotate it like this, select our cable and move it down. And you need to have a look out for other objects in the way of your cable, because according to physics, I think this shouldn't intersect with this. I think this looks quite good. Let's give it a bit more resolution. And change up the shape. This will be a bit too strong. Have a look out if these cables intersect right here. I think this looks great. Now let's select this one, duplicate it, and maybe, I think, rotate it like this. Like this. I think this looks great. And do the final one right here. And yeah, I think we could do something like this and then route our cable down inside of our mesh, our neon sign. Maybe make it like this. Because this is a bit too much. So select everything and subdivide to add a new control handle. Maybe like this. Yeah, I think this looks great. And now let's route this one right there. Let's give it a bit more dimensionality. Yeah, I think this looks okay. Okay, now one final thing, and then we're done with modeling, is to add some clamps which hold it to the wall, because at the moment these are too few attachment points. So now let's add our cursor right in the center, add a new cube. And with this, you could, of course, go right into the details, but I think I will keep it very simple right for this tutorial. And intersect it with this plane. Like this. Now, apply all transforms, select everything and bevel everything. Shade it smooth. And since this clamp will be held up via screws, let's add a circle, again with 8 vertices, rotated 90 degrees along the x-axis. And let's make a screw right here. Since this is very, very small, I will go into my view settings and set the clip start to something really small so it doesn't clip. Let's move it right here, zoom really close, and like this. Then extrude it, of course, go in edge selection mode, extrude it, scale it, scale it, and move it a bit out, extrude it, and now extrude it to inwards, and merge it at the center. Yeah, of course, we could be a bit more detailed right here, but I think this does the job. And add a second one right here. And then let's again add a circle. Now we'll create the attachment point for our tubes. Closer look at that. Extrude it along the y-axis. Let's have a look from the side. Kind of like this. Now let's again add another circle. Scale this one down. And this circle should roughly match the diameter of our tubes. So make it a bit larger. And then look at it from the bottom. And let's delete, go into local view, and let's delete these vertices, which leaves us with this half circle, which of course was the wrong way around. So sy -1 to mirror it and flip it along the y-axis. And let's extrude it down. Move it right into place. Select all faces and press Alt-E and extrude the faces along the normals. And this will let you make this shape. Now let's move this whole construction right into place. Let's do it right here and have a look if this fits. Shade this one smooth and maybe add a subdivision surface. Since this part is a bit more visible, add in a few edge loops. Like this and this. We don't need to be very 100% accurate with this. And now extrude this along the y-axis. Press Alt, press, yeah, I think this should work. Oh, I think I forgot the screws. So now let's move them back into place like this. If you even see this. And now let's select all of these objects, apply this subdivision surface, select all of these objects and press Ctrl J to join them into one group. And now let's select only this mesh right here by simply selecting one edge, pressing Ctrl L to select it, and let's rotate it a bit. Maybe add these screws as well. Rotate it and match it like this. Okay, this looks good, but let me add some pieces of wire to further tighten them to the wall. And to do this, select cursor to select it and add in a Bezier curve again. You see these techniques repeat a lot since they're very similar. Let's scale it down and define our starting point right here. Rotate it along the z-axis, and now let's try to match the shape. If we select our curve and give it some bevel, I think we can see a bit more how this will look in the end. Now, oops, let's go and add this. Try to use less the vertices as you can, as few vertices as you can. Scale this up. And yeah, I think this should look okay. Let me tighten that a bit up and rotate it a bit. Now let's duplicate this one and scale it a bit up. And always have a look if something intersects like this, because this is not physically accurate. Yeah, I think this should work. Now let's select everything we've created. In this case, oops, let's first connect them right here. So everything is accurate. Now let's select everything and duplicate it a few times, especially add this into the corners like this and give it some irregularities. Rotate them so they don't all look the same. I think this is a bit too much, but I think this can work. Yeah, more like this. Okay. Let's not make it symmetrical and add one right here. And simply change this up a bit. Give it a bit randomness. One right here. Maybe select this face right there and this edge and rotate this whole piece around, kind of like this. course, you could go into the details here, but I think this should be enough. And again, let's add one right here. Of course, in the final piece, you would do this a bit more accurately. But I think this does the job. I might add a last one right here. This is up to your personal preference. I think this should be about right. Okay. Just for a second, I will quickly show you how to do this with your logo, for example. I will just quickly show you how to do this with your logo, for example, and to create a logo animation. I've quickly opened a logo image in Inkscape, which is an open source vector drawing tool. If you have your logo as a vector file, of course, this is great. You can quickly export it and import it in Blender. But if you have an image file, you need to make a vector conversion beforehand. So select your image and then go to Path and go to Trace Bitmap and play a bit around with the settings. In this case, the default settings work quite well. Click OK and close up this window, and this will create a second version of your logo. This is the first image. Let's delete this, and now let's get this one right here. And this is, as you can see, a traced vector file. Let's select it and go to File and Save As, and then save it as a drawing, and make sure to save it as a SVG file, which is a vector file. So now click Save and go back to Blender. Go into Preferences and search for SVG. And enable this Import Export Scalable Vector Graphics add-on. Now let's go to File and Import and search for SVG. And let's search for our import. That's the file we saved in Inkscape, and import it. At the moment it is very small, so select everything and scale it up. And now you can see we have successfully imported our logo. If you go into edit mode, we can see that it looks quite clean. Go to Object and go to Convert to Mesh. And this creates a lot of polygons and a lot of new vertices, which we will need to get rid of in a moment. But first, let me select all the outer edges, like this. Let's do it for all of these meshes. And do the same, what we did earlier, press Ctrl-I to invert it. Let me enable screencast keys for you. Press X and delete edges, and this will leave us just with this outer edge. And now let's go to Object and convert them back to curve, like this. Go to Edit, Preferences, and now let's search in the Add-ons panel for Simplify Curves Plus. This is a plugin which helps us to simplify this complex geometry. And to do this, press F3 to search for Simplify Curves. Let's click it, and by changing this arrow value, you can change the resolution of your simplification. And in this case, I think I go with that, so that it reduces the amount of vertices but keeps the rough shape the same. This will create a second mesh, so you can delete the original, and now you see it's a lot simpler as it was before. Now let's again select it, convert it back to a mesh, and now it's all about cleaning this conversion some conversion errors up and having a look at your geometry, and again deciding where you want to place the openings. In this case, I will simply select one vertex, press V to disconnect it, and double G to slide it along its edge, and then take them both, extrude them down, and again bevel these one, Control Shift B, and make it round. Now let's select it, go into your curve settings, because now let's first convert it, of course, to curve. So convert to curve again, go into your curve settings and go to bevel, and now let's increase the depth. And as you can see, we are basically have now the same as we did earlier. And this is the way you can create a logo animation. Of course, there are some errors like this one. This is something you need to fix. Simply select these vertices and press F to fill them. Let's do this again right here. Fill them to clean up your mesh. Yeah, and that brings us back to our text object. Okay, and now materials. So let us first let's first go into rendered view. Let's make sure you are on cycles and enable GPU compute. And for my part, I enable viewport and render denoising, which improves the render speed. Let's go back to solid view and add a new camera. But first, let's set your cursor back to the world origin. So the camera you add now will be perfectly centered. Camera, press 0 to go into camera view. And let's change the aspect ratio to a square aspect ratio, 1080 by 1080, and GZZ to move it back. Okay, screencast keys it's a lot better, of course. Let's go into viewport display and increase the passport to make everything besides our main focus black. And now let's have a look at it rendered. Okay, now I will select the smaller render region so it is a bit faster. Of course, the scene in which we want to place our neon sign should be dark. So let's change the background color to black, nearly completely black. Nothing is 100% black. And now let's go in and change the materials. Let's select these inner light tubes and give them a new material called light. And let's select these and give them the same material. You can speed it up, for example, by selecting all of these, pressing Ctrl L and matching the materials. And now right in here, I will change it to an emission shader, which is right here. And let me have a look. Of course, nothing is visible since these outer tubes should be glass. Again, select all of these, and finally the last one, press Ctrl L and link the materials. And this glass should be, of course, a glass shader. So now let's have a look. And now our neon sign is lit. Let's give it some more strength, for example, like a 6. And give it some color. Blue, something like this. This is a lot more interesting. Let's turn on adaptive sampling. Yeah, I think this looks great. And now let's select our background and give this one a background texture. So go to shading, give it a new material, call it BG for background. And I've already downloaded some textures beforehand, and I will do a quick texture setup, which is a very cool trick. To do this, select your principal BSDF and press Ctrl-Shift-T. I think Node Wrangler, the Node Wrangler add-on, has to be enabled for this. Ctrl-Shift-T. And then go to your texture folder and select all the textures you want to be added. And then simply click Principal Texture Setup, And this tool will do everything for you. And yeah, now you see how this will look. Let's have a look through our camera. Yeah, I think this looks great at the moment. Let's go back into the camera, and since this texture is not very high resolution, I will scale it back until it is just in the frame, like this. I think this looks great. And to further give it a bit more realism, let's enable displacement. Since a displacement map is already connected, we just need to simply go into our material settings, our modifiers, excuse me, and add a subdivision surface with an adaptive sampling added. And now let's subdivide it a bit more and scale it up to better fit the frame. And then in the material settings, scroll right down to the bottom and go to the settings, and under displacement, change it to displacement and bump. And this will, of course, make a very heavy displacement map. And to reduce the effect of this, let's reduce this one to 0.05, I think. And yeah, I think this looks great. Now let's give some materials to all the other things in our scene. For example, the cables should be black and should have a plastic material. So let's select one, give it a new material, and make it a bit darker, not completely black. Give it some specularity, decrease its roughness. Yeah, and I think this looks great. And now let's select all the other cables. And finally our material, cable with our material, and press Ctrl L to fit, to match the materials. Now for all of these small things right here, I think they are made up of metal. I think we need to change this a bit. Give me a second. More like this. These wires are simply made of steel, I think. So let's select one and call it wire. Give it a grayish base color. Give it a metallic property, which is not 100% metallic. A bit more specularity, and reduce the roughness to make it a bit more glossy. And now let's add this material to all of our wires. We could have done this a bit better in the first hand, but you never know. Let's select all of these. And select the last one, Ctrl L, and apply materials. And finally, I think we will give these ones, kind of darker material, maybe a bit metallic, a bit specular, and a bit more roughness. Let me have a look how this looks rendered. Let's rename it to clamp, for example, and give it to all of these other ones, these other instances as well. Press Ctrl L and materials. Okay, now we've, I think, successfully created a very cool scene. And now let's make the lighting a bit more interesting. So let's go back into camera view and add a new area light. And make it a bit smaller, around like this, along the y-axis. It's larger on the x-axis, and rotate it. So now let's go back into rendered view and have a look. Give this a reddish color. And make it really, really, really weak. And make it really small to get real harsh reflections. 0.1, 0.3 maybe. Made a bit larger. Yeah. This will create color contrast. And let's duplicate one of these. And move it to the lower left corner. Yeah, now I think this looks very cool. Of course, you can be free with the color choices. And before we finally render and composite everything, I think we now need to animate everything. That's the next step. So let's go back to animation, the animation tab. First, let's select our camera and go into the camera view right here. And I think we will make the animation about 100 frames long. And I think this is the starting point. Maybe we scale up the background a bit and move the camera a bit farther out. Let's hit I on the first frame, frame number 0, and insert a keyframe for location. Go to 100 and move it along the y-axis a little bit. And again, add a keyframe for location. Let's play this animation. Maybe turn on this texture preview. I think this looks cool. Maybe you can play around with the easing modes or the interpolation. I like to choose the quadratic interpolation for this. Or you could choose cubic, for example. Or you can make it Bezier. Whatever you want. This will change the animation speed, the animation properties. And now let's animate these flashing lights as if these neon signs are turning on. So let's select one of the lights, the light tubes, go into the material settings and go to frame 0. And for the strength, set 0, of course. Insert a keyframe right here and go zoom in and go about 2 frames forward and give it a 2. Again, a 0. Insert a keyframe. Let's hold it for 2 seconds. Make this one 0 as well. Now let's give it a 6. Insert a keyframe. 0.1. 8 maybe. And again 0. Hold this for 2 frames. And again 0 and 6. Now let's go into this texture preview mode and let's hide all of these outer glass tubes since they're not what we want. And now let's play the animation. Okay. Let's move it a bit around. Let's change this to 0.1 to give it a slower start. This is all a bit of trial error. This is all a bit of trial and error. Maybe this was not so great. And now let's select the second one, since all of these are animating at the same time. Select one of these, go into its light material and press this little 4 to make it its own separate material, and then move them around. So now you can see they are off sync. Let's change some of these values. Let's delete some. And do the same thing with all of these as well. Let's scale them a bit down. And let's finally do it with this one as well. And now, with this quite complex animation. Of course, you can play around with it that a lot longer. But I think this is what we have now. You can add some flickers right in the middle as well. So let's insert a new keyframe and go to 0, go to 0.1, go to 0, and now let's wait for a few frames, hold 0, and again go to 6. Maybe let's move this right here. And let's copy everything we've made here and copy it to random positions to all of these other lights. And now we can add a second one right here to give it some randomness. And I think this looks really, really cool. Okay, now we're done with animation. Now let's render our scene. I think let's have a look right here. Of course, Alt-H to unhide everything. And I will look right somewhere in the middle where every light is on, and then we'll do one last final pass. Oh, very interesting could also be to animate these lights as well, so they add a bit of movement to our scene. So let's go to frame number 1, to frame the starting frame, press G and insert a location, and then go to the last one and move them only slightly to the right. So as you can see, they animate a bit and give a bit more dynamic movement. Do the same thing for this one as well. And of course, have a look at that. If it's rendered, yeah, I think this looks pretty cool. And now everything is moving. Now let's go into a frame where every light is on. I think this would match this case. Let's set our render sampling to something reasonable, adaptive sampling, render denoising, and now let's press F12 and let it render. Yeah, and looking at this, I think there are some optimizations we could do. I think these are a bit too light. These cables are a bit too glossy, and you can't see anything from our clamps. So let's have a look at all of these three problems. Let's select one of these parts and go into its material settings right here, I think. Go to shading. And yeah, of course, they don't have a material, so let's give them one. And I think let's choose our wire material. This was the problem. Okay, and wire, and again, wire, and the cable should be a bit more rough, so increase the roughness. And these things are not really visible because they are much too small, I think. To fix this, simply select one of these and scale it up. Or we could select every one of these, since the right parts are still selected, and go into edit mode. And now change the scaling based on individual origins and scale them up. And scale them and press Shift Y to limit the scale only to the X and Y axis. And I think now they are a bit more visible. Yeah, I think this looks a bit better. Okay, with that done, let's now finally hit render and then go into the compositor. To finally enhance this image even more, we'll now go into the compositor. So let's close this window up and go into compositor, use nodes, and with node wrangler enabled, press Ctrl Shift to add a new viewer and Shift right click to connect them to a new node. Press V or Alt V to change the size of your background image. Make this a bit smaller, maybe make it a bit larger, I think, like this. Alt V to make it a bit bigger. And now there are some things we can change. Of course, first I would go and add some, where is it? Some glare, some glow, because this will make our image look a whole lot better. Let's change this to fog glow and let's make the threshold a bit bigger, I think, like this. Change the size to 2. Let's press M to see the before and after. Maybe the threshold is a bit too much. Maybe it should be at 1. This will add this subtle glow. Now let's add another one and increase the size on this one to 8. The threshold to 4, maybe 3, and change the mix to -0.5, -0.3, I think. Maybe a bit less is more in this case. And if we turn off and on both of these nodes, you can see it gives this really cool effect. Finally, add a color and brightness contrast node and increase the contrast a bit. But just by a small amount, 1.1 should be enough. This is of course up to you. Maybe not. I don't know. Make it a bit less intense. 0.01. Yeah, something like this. And now I think we're done with that. Of course, you could add a vignette or some different effects to this as you like, and you can change the color. But I think the glare, this glow, is the most important thing. And to render this whole animation, go to your render settings and set your final sampling size, adaptive sampling. I think image denoising is very important. And yeah, leave every setting right here the same. And let's change the end frame to 100 in this case, since our animation is 100 frames long. Match the frame rate to your liking and set your output right here. And you could choose to add a PNG and convert this to a video later on, or you can render it as a video straight out of Blender as a FFmpeg, for example, and maybe Matroska or MP4 is a great choice. And yeah, you can match all the settings. And if you're done, hit render and render animation. Yeah, and with that done, this is our final animation. I'm very happy how it turned out. You can add some sound effects, for example. You can do everything in Blender. I heard Blender's video editor will get really good in a few versions, so keep an eye out for that. And with that done, thanks for watching. Thanks for watching this long, very long tutorial. If you have any questions left, feel free to ask them in the comments. And you can, of course, download all the project files from this tutorial in the link down below in the description. Leave a like, subscribe, and see you next time. Bye.